Rain hammered the streets of Birmingham as Daniel Mercer locked the rear entrance of the warehouse and checked his phone for the fourth time in 10 minutes. 3 missed calls. No voicemail. Unknown number. He slipped the phone back into his jacket and walked toward the empty car park with his shoulders tense beneath the freezing November wind. The industrial district was almost silent at that hour except for distant traffic and the metallic rattling of loose fencing nearby. Normally, Daniel liked the quiet after late shifts. Tonight, every sound felt like a warning. A fourth call lit up his screen before he reached his car. Unknown caller. Daniel stared at it vibrating in his hand. His thumb hovered over the answer button before he declined it again. A second later, another message appeared. "We need to talk." He muttered a curse under his breath and shoved the phone away. The drive home took 20 minutes. Rows of wet terraced houses blurred past under orange streetlights while old rock music played quietly through the speakers. Daniel kept checking his mirrors, convinced the same dark hatchback had followed him through 2 roundabouts. By the time he reached his street, the car was gone. Inside the house, warmth wrapped around him instantly. The television hummed softly in the living room while 16-year-old Ellie Mercer sat curled beneath a blanket, half-finished homework spread across the sofa. "You're late again," she said without looking up. "Warehouse inventory." Daniel forced a tired smile. "You should be asleep." She finally glanced at him and frowned. "You look awful." "Thanks. I mean it." Ellie lowered her voice. "Are those people calling again?" Daniel stopped halfway to the kitchen. "What people?" "The ones you keep ignoring." For a moment, only the ticking clock above the television filled the room. Daniel opened the fridge, pretending to search for something. "It's nothing," he said quietly. "You've said that all week." He grabbed a bottle of water. His hands shook slightly as he twisted the cap open. Ellie watched carefully. Since her mother left 3 years earlier, she had learned how to read every change in her father's expression. Tonight, his eyes looked hollow with exhaustion. "Dad, are you in trouble?" Daniel swallowed hard before answering. "No, just work stress." She did not believe him. Outside, rainwater rolled down the windows in crooked streams. Across the street, a dark Vauxhall sat parked beneath a broken street lamp. Its engine remained off, but 2 figures were visible inside. A man in his 20s sat behind the wheel, jaw tight, fingers drumming impatiently against the steering wheel. Beside him, a pale young woman stared silently toward Daniel's house. The glow from the street lamp briefly revealed bruised shadows beneath her eyes. "You said he'd pay," she whispered. "He will," the man replied coldly. Back inside, Daniel checked every lock on the front door twice before heading upstairs. He hated himself for feeling afraid over something so stupid. £200. That was all. A tiny debt that should have disappeared weeks ago. Yet the calls kept coming. Daniel moved toward the bedroom window and pulled the curtain aside. The Vauxhall was still there. The young woman now looked frightened, almost regretful, but the man beside her leaned forward with burning intensity, staring directly at the house. Daniel stepped back immediately, pulse racing. He suddenly remembered the first phone call from days earlier, the calm male voice promising that debts were always paid in blood. At the time, Daniel thought it was an empty threat. At 11:47 p.m., his phone vibrated again on the bedside table. Unknown number. This time, there was only a text message. "You should have paid what you owed." Daniel stared at the words while a cold pressure tightened inside his chest. Downstairs, the house creaked softly in the wind. Then, just after midnight, 3 violent knocks exploded through the front door. The knocking continued for nearly a full minute after Daniel Mercer reached the bottom of the stairs. Heavy, angry, deliberate. Ellie stood frozen near the living room doorway, clutching her phone tightly against her chest. Daniel motioned for her to stay back while he approached the front entrance carefully. Through the frosted glass, he could barely make out 2 dark silhouettes standing outside beneath the rain. "Dad," Ellie whispered nervously. Daniel unlocked the chain but kept the door closed. "Who is it?" For several seconds, nobody answered. Then a male voice spoke quietly from the other side. "You owe us." Daniel's breathing became uneven. I told you I need more time. You already had time. Ellie watched her father's face drain of color. Before she could speak again, Daniel suddenly turned toward her. Go upstairs, he ordered. I'm not leaving you down here alone. Ellie, now. Something in his voice terrified her enough to obey. She backed toward the staircase while Daniel slowly opened the front door. The next moments blurred together in fragments she would later struggle to remember clearly. Raised voices. A loud crash against the hallway wall. Daniel shouting for someone to calm down. Then a woman crying somewhere near the kitchen. Ellie locked herself inside her bedroom and called emergency services with shaking hands, but before she could finish speaking, a scream erupted downstairs so violently that she dropped the phone onto the carpet. Then everything went silent. By the time armed officers forced entry into the house the following morning, the quiet inside felt unnatural. Daniel Mercer lay dead across the kitchen floor. Blood covered the cupboards, the sink, and sections of the ceiling. One overturned chair rested beside the body while shattered glass glittered beneath the fluorescent lights. Detectives would later count 20 separate stab wounds across Daniel's chest, neck, and shoulders. Even the responding officers looked disturbed. Jesus Christ, one constable muttered under his breath. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins arrived shortly after sunrise. She had spent 15 years investigating violent crime across Birmingham, but the sheer rage inside the kitchen unsettled her immediately. This was not simple robbery. It looked personal. Collins crouched near the body carefully while forensic photographers moved around her. Daniel's face remained frozen in shock, his hands sliced deeply from defensive wounds. He had fought desperately before dying. What's missing? Collins asked. A uniformed officer checked his notes. Wallet still here. Watch too. Television untouched. Doesn't look like burglary. Collins nodded slowly. 20 stab wounds over £200 made no sense. Upstairs, Ellie sat wrapped in a blanket while paramedics treated cuts on her palms from gripping broken phone pieces too tightly. Her eyes looked swollen and empty. Collins approached gently. Ellie, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me what happened last night. The teenager swallowed hard. There were two of them, she whispered. A man and a woman. Did you know them? I never saw their faces properly. Collins waited patiently. My dad loaned money to someone a few weeks ago, Ellie continued. Some guy called Liam. He kept showing up asking for help. Dad said he was struggling with drugs. How much money? £200. The detective exchanged a brief glance with another officer nearby. That's what this was about. Ellie shook her head slowly. Dad acted like it wasn't just money. He was scared of them. Outside the property, neighbors gathered behind police tape while crime scene investigators searched the street. Several witnesses described hearing shouting shortly after midnight. One of them sounded like a young woman crying, an elderly neighbor explained. Then the man started screaming. Another witness reported hearing Daniel beg someone to stop before the noise abruptly ended. Hours later, Collins reviewed nearby security footage collected from a convenience store at the end of the street. Grainy black and white video showed two hooded figures running through heavy rain at 12:18 a.m. One appeared taller and moved aggressively, constantly looking behind him. The second figure stumbled several times before being pulled forward violently by the arm. Collins paused the footage. The woman's sleeve had ridden upward briefly during the struggle, exposing what looked like bruising near her wrist. Zoom in, Collins ordered quietly. The image sharpened slightly. Not bruising. Finger marks. Collins leaned back in silence as a sick feeling settled inside her stomach. This case was already becoming something darker than a simple debt collection gone wrong. And somewhere in Birmingham, the two people caught on that camera were still together. As forensic teams continued searching the Mercer house, officers discovered a partial shoe print in blood near the back door. The sole pattern matched a cheap trainer brand, but one detail stood out immediately to Collins. The print was far smaller than expected for an adult man. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins stared at the bloody shoe print photograph pinned across the incident board. Small size. Cheap sole pattern. Possibly female. Yet 20 stab wounds suggested overwhelming rage and physical violence. Something about the scene refused to fit together cleanly. By late afternoon, the name Liam Vance surfaced repeatedly through local interviews. Patrol officers recognized him immediately. Minor drug offenses, assault complaints, disturbances, but nothing serious enough to keep him locked away for long. Several witnesses described him as explosive, unpredictable, and fiercely attached to his younger sister, Chloe. One former neighbor described them bluntly. "They're damaged people." Collins tracked their address to a decaying apartment block near Birmingham's industrial outskirts, where broken elevators and graffiti-covered hallways smelled permanently of damp cigarettes and mold. 2 patrol officers accompanied her up 4 flights of stairs before stopping outside flat 42. Music played softly behind the door. Collins knocked twice. The sound inside stopped immediately. After several seconds, the door creaked open just enough for a young woman to peer out nervously. Chloe Vance looked exhausted, pale, and painfully thin beneath an oversized grey hoodie. Dark bruises lingered faintly near her wrist. Collins noticed them instantly. "Chloe Vance." The girl hesitated before nodding. "Would like to ask you a few questions." Before Chloe could respond, a man appeared behind her. Liam Vance. He was taller than Collins expected, with sharp cheekbones, restless eyes, and tattoos creeping along his neck beneath a black sweatshirt. Even standing still, he radiated aggression. "What's this about?" he demanded. "Daniel Mercer." For the first time, Liam's expression flickered. Only slightly. But Collins saw it. "We already told officers we don't know anything," Liam replied quickly. "You spoke to officers." "They stopped us this morning." Collins studied Chloe carefully while Liam talked. The girl barely raised her eyes from the floor. Her fingers twisted anxiously inside her sleeves as though she were trying to disappear inside herself. "Mind if we come in?" Collins asked. Liam blocked the doorway slightly. "You got a warrant?" "No." "Then no." The door slammed shut. Inside the apartment, Chloe immediately stepped away from her brother. "You said they wouldn't come here," she whispered. "They've got nothing." "You don't know that." Liam grabbed her wrist suddenly, not hard enough to leave fresh marks but firm enough to silence her. Chloe flinched automatically. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "You say nothing. Understand?" Her breathing became shallow. The apartment itself reflected years of chaos and neglect. Dirty dishes filled the sink. Cigarette burns marked the furniture. Several empty pill bottles rested near the television beside unpaid bills and overdue notices. Fragments of childhood photographs sat scattered across shelves. In one picture, Liam and Chloe appeared around 10 and 8 years old. Chloe smiled nervously while Liam stood protectively beside her with a swollen black eye. Their father had been an alcoholic known for violent outbursts. Police records showed countless domestic disturbance calls over the years, though charges were rarely filed. Their mother disappeared when Chloe was 13. Neighbors often heard screaming through the walls. Sometimes from the parents. Sometimes from Liam himself. Over time, the siblings became isolated from almost everyone else. Liam dropped out of school early and drifted into drugs and petty crime while Chloe rarely left the apartment without him. Those who knew them described their relationship as unhealthy, almost suffocating. "He treats her like she belongs to him," one former classmate later told investigators. That evening, Collins reviewed additional footage from nearby businesses surrounding Daniel Mercer's neighborhood. One camera finally captured a clearer angle of the fleeing suspects. Liam's face became partially visible beneath his hood. Collins immediately secured a search warrant. Rain poured heavily again by the time officers forced entry into flat 42 just after midnight. Liam erupted instantly, screaming at police while officers dragged him against the wall in handcuffs. "You've got no right touching her," he shouted. Chloe stood frozen beside the kitchen doorway, trembling violently as officers searched the apartment room by room. Collins entered the bedroom slowly. The mattress on Chloe's side sat directly on the floor beside piles of clothes and scattered medication packets. One officer crouched beside the bed frame. He called carefully. Collins approached. Hidden beneath the mattress was a pair of white trainers stuffed inside a plastic shopping bag. Dark reddish stains covered the soles. The room fell silent as the forensic officer examined them under his flashlight. Then he looked up grimly. The laboratory confirmation arrived shortly before dawn. The blood on the trainers belonged to Daniel Mercer. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins stood inside the observation room overlooking separate interrogation suites while officers processed Liam and Chloe Vance downstairs. Rain streaked the station windows, turning the city beyond into blurred shadows. Liam remained aggressive from the moment of arrest. He demanded a solicitor immediately, swore at officers, and repeatedly insisted Chloe knew nothing about the murder. Chloe behaved differently. She looked terrified. Not of the police. Of Liam. Inside interview room 2, Chloe sat hunched beneath fluorescent lighting with her sleeves pulled over her hands. She barely touched the tea placed in front of her. Collins entered quietly and took the seat opposite her. "You understand why you're here?" Chloe nodded weakly. "Can you explain how Daniel Mercer's blood ended up on your shoes?" Silence. Chloe's eyes remained fixed on the table surface. Her breathing became shallow, uneven. Collins noticed faint scars running along the girl's forearm, old injuries hidden beneath fresh bruises. "Chloe," Collins said gently, "we know you were at the house." The young woman finally spoke. "It wasn't meant to happen." "What wasn't?" Another silence stretched across the room. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered troubling details about Daniel Mercer's final weeks. His phone record showed repeated contact with several known addicts connected to illegal prescription drug sales around Birmingham. Detectives initially believed Daniel had simply loaned money to Liam Vance, but the situation now appeared far more complicated. Daniel had threatened someone. And someone wanted him quiet. A search through Daniel's work locker uncovered handwritten notes listing medication names, local chemists, and partial addresses. One page included Liam's full name beside a short sentence. "Knows who's stealing them." Collins stared at the note carefully. The debt had never truly been about £200. Months earlier, Daniel had encountered Chloe outside a convenience store during a freezing winter evening. She stood alone beside the building wearing thin clothes and holding a split lip hidden poorly beneath makeup. Daniel recognized her from the neighborhood. "You all right?" he asked cautiously. Chloe immediately stepped backward. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." Daniel offered to call someone, but Chloe panicked at the suggestion. Her eyes darted constantly toward the nearby road as though expecting someone dangerous to appear at any second. Then Liam arrived. He crossed the car park quickly, fury already burning across his face before he even reached them. "What's going on here?" Daniel raised his hands calmly. "Easy. I was just checking she's all right." Liam stepped directly between them. "She doesn't need your help." Chloe lowered her head instantly. Daniel remembered the fear in her expression afterward. Not fear of strangers. Fear of her brother. From that moment forward, Liam became convinced Daniel Mercer wanted something from Chloe. His paranoia twisted ordinary kindness into manipulation. Whenever Daniel later warned Chloe to seek help or leave Birmingham entirely, Liam interpreted it as an attempt to take her away from him. Inside the station, Chloe's condition worsened as questioning continued. Fragments of memory collided inside her mind without order. Daniel shouting. Liam screaming. Blood across kitchen tiles. Her own hands shaking uncontrollably. At one point, she suddenly covered her ears tightly. "He kept yelling," she whispered. "Who did?" Collins asked carefully. Chloe blinked several times. "I can't remember." In the next room, Liam remained cold and defensive. "She's vulnerable," he told detectives. "You're pressuring her because you've got nothing else." "You were seen near Daniel Mercer's house. Doesn't prove murder." "What about the blood?" Liam leaned back slowly. "She cuts herself sometimes. Maybe he wasn't supposed to die like that." The words lingered heavily inside the interrogation room long after Chloe Vance stopped speaking. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins studied the young woman carefully, sensing that the truth inside her mind existed in shattered pieces rather than a complete memory. Chloe looked exhausted beyond her years. Not simply tired. Damaged. Over the following hours, doctors evaluated her mental state while detectives continued building timelines around Daniel Mercer's final days. Chloe drifted through questioning almost like someone trapped between dreams and reality. Sometimes she answered normally. Other times she stared into empty corners of the room as though replaying something only she could see. Blood on kitchen tiles. Daniel gasping for air. Liam shouting her name. The memories came in flashes. Fragments. When Chloe closed her eyes, childhood returned instead. She remembered hiding beneath a staircase at 8 years old while glass shattered downstairs. Her father screaming drunken threats. Her mother crying. Liam crouching beside her in the darkness with both hands pressed over her ears. "It's okay," he whispered back then. "I won't let anyone hurt you." For years, she believed him. As the violence inside their home worsened, Liam became more than an older brother. He became protector, parent, and prison all at once. After their mother vanished, Liam started controlling nearly every part of Chloe's life. Who she spoke to, where she went, what she wore. He constantly reminded her the world was cruel and dangerous. "People only use you," he would say. "Nobody cares about us except me." Over time, Chloe stopped questioning him. Fear became dependence. Dependence became loyalty. By 17, she barely left the apartment alone anymore. Liam handled everything: money, food, conversations with strangers. Whenever Chloe attempted independence, his behavior darkened immediately. He accused her of betrayal, abandonment, or secretly wanting to replace him. Then Daniel Mercer entered their lives. At first, Chloe barely noticed him. Just another tired man buying coffee near the convenience store where she sometimes waited for Liam during drug pickups. But Daniel spoke kindly to her in ways that felt unfamiliar. Normal. That frightened Liam instantly. Collins reviewed witness statements describing multiple arguments between Daniel and Liam over recent months. Daniel repeatedly urged Chloe to seek help after noticing bruises on her arms and neck. Once, he even offered her temporary shelter if she ever needed somewhere safe. Liam discovered the conversation days later. The resulting fight inside the apartment became so violent neighbors nearly called police. "You think he wants to save you?" Liam shouted. "He was just being nice," Chloe cried. "Nobody's nice for free." That sentence stayed buried inside Chloe's mind afterward. Nobody's nice for free. Inside her interrogation room, Chloe began scratching anxiously at her sleeves until a police doctor gently stopped her. Collins watched through the observation glass while reviewing fresh evidence recovered from Daniel Mercer's mobile phone. One file immediately caught her attention. Audio recording, 3 days before death. Collins played it carefully. At first, only traffic noise filled the speaker. Then Daniel's voice emerged. "She's terrified of you." Liam answered instantly. "You don't know anything about us." "I know she needs help." A loud banging sound followed, possibly a car door slamming nearby. "You stay away from her," Liam warned. "You think controlling her means protecting her." Several seconds of silence passed. Then Liam spoke again, quieter this time. "More dangerous. She's all I've got." "That doesn't give you ownership." Suddenly Chloe's voice appeared faintly in the background. "Please stop fighting." The fear in her tone silenced everyone inside the observation room. Daniel spoke once more. "Chloe, listen to me carefully. You can leave this situation." Liam exploded instantly. "No, she can't." More movement. Shouting. Heavy breathing near the phone microphone. Then came the final sentence. "Cold. Possessive. Terrifying. If she leaves me," Liam said, "someone bleeds." The recording ended seconds later. Collins slowly lowered the device while unease settled across the room. The case was becoming psychologically tangled in ways deeper than simple violence. Liam clearly loved his sister, but his version of love looked poisoned by years of trauma, obsession, and control. Meanwhile, Chloe sat alone in interrogation, trembling beneath fluorescent lights while memories continued collapsing into each other. Daniel trying to help her. Liam screaming. Blood spreading across white kitchen tiles. At one point she suddenly lifted her hands in front of her face, staring at them with growing horror. Though cleaned hours earlier, she still imagined dark red stains covering her skin. An officer entered cautiously. "Chloe." Her eyes filled with tears. Very softly, almost like a frightened child, she whispered, "I didn't know he was going to lose control. I didn't know he was going to lose control." The sentence echoed through Detective Inspector Rhea Collins's thoughts as investigators spent the next 2 days rebuilding the final hours of Daniel Mercer's life. Piece by piece, the murder transformed from a chaotic bloodbath into something even more disturbing, a tragedy driven by fear, dependency, and emotional collapse. Surveillance footage placed Liam and Chloe Vance near Daniel's neighborhood shortly after 11:30 p.m. Rain poured heavily that night, blurring most camera angles, but detectives tracked their movements between side streets and closed storefronts until they finally disappeared near Mercer's house. Neither carried visible weapons when they arrived. That detail unsettled Collins immediately. Forensic teams later confirmed the kitchen knife used in the attack belonged to Daniel himself. Inside interview rooms, Liam and Chloe continued offering fragmented, conflicting versions of events. Yet certain details slowly aligned enough for detectives to reconstruct what happened after midnight. Liam had gone there furious. Not because of money alone. Because Chloe had started listening to Daniel. Weeks earlier, Daniel Mercer warned Chloe that Liam's drug connections would eventually destroy both their lives. He encouraged her to contact social services and offered to help her find temporary housing if she wanted to leave her brother's control. Chloe never accepted the offer. But Liam discovered everything. To him, Daniel was not helping. He was stealing her. At 12:03 a.m., neighbors heard shouting outside Mercer's front door. Daniel initially refused to let them inside, but Liam threatened to cause a scene loud enough to wake the entire street. Eventually Daniel opened the door, hoping to calm things before Ellie became frightened upstairs. That decision sealed his fate. Inside the house, tension escalated almost immediately. "You've been talking to her behind my back," Liam accused. Daniel kept his voice low. "Because she's scared of you." "That's a lie." Chloe reportedly stood near the hallway silently crying while the two men argued. Witnesses later described hearing objects knocked over followed by Daniel demanding they leave. Then Daniel made a mistake. He threatened police. Investigators later found Daniel's mobile phone smashed beneath the kitchen table, likely destroyed during the struggle. Before that happened, however, he attempted dialing emergency services after warning Liam he planned to expose the prescription drug operation connected to several local dealers. "You're finished," Daniel reportedly shouted. Something changed in Liam after that. Not calm anger. Panic. For someone raised around constant violence and instability, prison represented annihilation. Losing Chloe represented something even worse. In Liam's fractured mind, Daniel Mercer threatened both at once. The first punch came seconds later. Forensics showed Daniel crashed backward into the kitchen counter during the struggle. A broken plate found near the sink matched blood traces from Liam's knuckles. Chloe screamed repeatedly for them to stop while neighbors heard furniture overturning violently. Then came the knife. Detectives never determined exactly who grabbed it first. Liam claimed Daniel armed himself. Chloe insisted Liam reached for it during the fight. Physical evidence suggested all three touched the weapon at different points. What happened afterward unfolded in terrifying bursts of chaos rather than calculated murder. Daniel suffered defensive wounds almost immediately, indicating he tried grabbing the blade barehanded. Blood sprayed across cupboard doors during the struggle while several stab wounds appeared shallow and erratic, signs of frantic movement rather than precision. But others looked different. Deeper. More deliberate. Neighbors later described hearing Chloe crying uncontrollably while Liam screamed incoherently inside the kitchen. At one point, Daniel could reportedly be heard begging someone to stop. Then came a horrifying silence. During later questioning, Chloe struggled most when describing the stabbing itself. Her memory fractured repeatedly under emotional pressure. "I remember blood," she whispered once. "Whose blood?" Collins asked. "I don't know anymore." Liam's version remained colder. "He attacked first," he insisted. Everything happened too fast. Yet forensic analysts discovered Daniel suffered multiple wounds after collapsing onto the floor. The violence continued even when he no longer posed a threat. That detail haunted Collins deeply, because rage alone did not explain it. Something emotional exploded inside that kitchen beyond ordinary fear or self-defense. Years of trauma, dependency, paranoia, and buried anger collided within minutes until violence became unstoppable. Daniel Mercer simply stood at the center of it. Investigators reconstructed the final moments carefully through blood patterns and witness timelines. Daniel collapsed near the refrigerator after severe blood loss while Chloe and Liam moved frantically around the kitchen afterward. One bloody footprint suggested Chloe stepped directly beside the body. Another indicated Liam paced repeatedly toward the sink. At 12:18 a.m., security cameras captured them fleeing through rain-soaked streets together. But one crucial question remained unanswered. The medical examiner identified 19 stab wounds inflicted while Daniel Mercer was still alive. The 20th wound was different. Delivered moments later. After death. Collins stared silently at the autopsy photographs spread across her desk late that evening. The final wound entered at a downward angle inconsistent with several earlier strikes. Smaller. Less forceful. Possibly from someone shorter. Possibly someone standing over the body after everything else had already ended. In the interrogation wing downstairs, Chloe sat alone beneath dim lighting while officers prepared another round of questioning. She rubbed her trembling hands together repeatedly, unable to stop replaying the kitchen inside her head. Daniel bleeding. Liam screaming. The knife rising one final time. But in every version of the memory, one detail remained terrifyingly unclear. Whose hand was holding it? Whose hand was holding it? The question consumed Detective Inspector Rhea Collins as pressure mounted around the investigation. News outlets across Birmingham had already seized onto the brutality of Daniel Mercer's murder, turning the case into a citywide obsession. 20 stab wounds. A teenage daughter hiding upstairs. 2 disturbed siblings fleeing into the rain. But Collins knew the public version of the story remained incomplete. Both Liam and Chloe Vance were still hiding something. Inside interview room 1, Liam leaned back in his chair with calculated calm despite the bruises darkening his face from arrest. His solicitor sat beside him silently while Collins placed autopsy photographs across the metal table. "You understand the severity of this?" she asked. Liam barely glanced at the images. "I already told you. Chloe had nothing to do with it. She was inside the house. She tried stopping it. You expect us to believe that?" Liam's jaw tightened. Collins studied him carefully. Beneath the aggression and hostility, something more desperate existed now. Fear. Not fear for himself, but fear of losing control over Chloe completely. "I lost my temper," Liam finally said. "That's it. You stabbed Daniel Mercer 20 times because you lost your temper. He threatened us. He threatened to expose your drug connections." Liam's eyes darkened instantly. "You don't know what he was like." Collins noticed the wording again. Not denial. Justification. Meanwhile, downstairs in interview room 3, Chloe sat wrapped in a grey blanket with untouched tea cooling beside her. Hours of questioning had exhausted her mentally and emotionally. Each memory returned in violent flashes rather than clear sequences. Daniel gasping for air. The metallic smell of blood. Liam shouting over and over again. At first, Chloe repeated Liam's version almost exactly. Daniel attacked first. Everything happened too quickly. Liam protected her. But trauma made consistency impossible. Every time detectives revisited the details, small changes emerged. "He pushed Liam first," Chloe whispered during one interview. Later, she said, "I think Liam grabbed the knife." Hours afterward, she suddenly claimed Daniel was already bleeding before she entered the kitchen fully. Collins recognized the pattern immediately. Chloe was not simply lying. She was trying to survive her own memories. A police psychologist later explained that severe emotional dependency often distorted perception during traumatic violence. Chloe's entire identity revolved around Liam's approval and protection. Admitting his actions meant destroying the only person she believed had ever loved her. But guilt was slowly breaking through the conditioning. During another interview, Collins placed photographs from the crime scene carefully across the table. Chloe stared at them silently. One image showed blood smeared across the kitchen floor beside Daniel's outstretched hand. Suddenly Chloe looked away sharply. "He kept asking us to stop," she whispered. Collins remained still. "Who did?" "Daniel." The room fell silent. For the first time, Chloe began describing the attack emotionally instead of mechanically. Her breathing became uneven while fragments spilled out without order. Liam was shouting, saying he ruined everything. "What were you doing?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." Tears rolled down Chloe's face instantly. "I was trying to make it stop." But the memories kept returning stronger now. Daniel collapsing against the refrigerator. Liam gripping the knife. Then Liam turning toward her with wild panic in his eyes. "Help me," he screamed. Chloe covered her ears tightly at the memory. "He kept yelling at me," she cried. "He said if I loved him, I wouldn't let Daniel call police. He said we'd lose everything." Collins leaned forward carefully. What happened next? For several seconds, Chloe could not speak. Then came another flash. The knife handle slippery with blood. Daniel barely moving on the floor. Liam screaming again. "Do it! Do it! Do it!" Chloe suddenly began shaking violently. "I didn't want him angry," she whispered. Across the station, Liam demanded another interview the moment he learned Chloe's questioning continued. "She's confused," he insisted angrily. "You're manipulating her." Collins finally understood the terrifying truth. Neither sibling was protecting the other completely. They were protecting themselves from different things. Liam feared abandonment. Chloe feared becoming the monster she remembered inside that kitchen. Back inside interview room 3, silence stretched heavily between Chloe and Collins. The young woman stared down at her trembling hands for nearly a full minute before speaking again. Very softly. Almost like surrender. "I remember the knife," she whispered. Collins did not interrupt. Chloe closed her eyes as tears slipped down her face. Then finally, broken by guilt and exhaustion, she confessed. "I stabbed him too. I stabbed him too." The confession spread across Birmingham within hours. By the following morning, every local newspaper carried the same horrifying story. 2 siblings charged in the savage murder of a hard-working father over £200 debt. Television crews gathered outside the courthouse while reporters dissected every detail of the case with relentless fascination. But as journalists dug deeper into Liam and Chloe Vance's past, public outrage slowly mixed with something far more uncomfortable. Sympathy. Archived police reports revealed officers had visited the Vance household more than 20 times during the siblings' childhood. Neighbors repeatedly complained about screaming, violence, and suspected abuse inside the apartment where they grew up. Nothing truly changed. Teachers documented Chloe arriving at school hungry, withdrawn, and bruised on multiple occasions. One report described Liam threatening another child with a broken bottle at age 12 after being mocked about his father. Again, nobody intervened properly. A former social worker admitted the system had been overwhelmed for years. They were surviving, not living, she told reporters quietly. But cases like theirs disappear when there aren't enough resources. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the pattern became. Violence had shaped every stage of the siblings' lives long before Daniel Mercer entered it. Their father drank heavily, beat them regularly, and isolated them from relatives. Their mother suffered years of abuse before vanishing entirely without explanation. Liam learned early that fear meant control. Chloe learned survival meant obedience. By adulthood, both were emotionally trapped inside lessons taught to them as children. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins struggled privately with the case more than she admitted publicly. Reviewing old records late at night, she realized how many chances existed to stop the tragedy long before murder occurred. Police failed them. Schools failed them. Social services failed them. And eventually, Daniel Mercer crossed paths with 2 damaged people already collapsing under years of untreated trauma. At Daniel's funeral, Rain fell steadily across the cemetery while Ellie Mercer stood beside her father's coffin, barely able to look toward the gathered mourners. Friends described Daniel as hard-working, protective, and stubbornly kind despite his own struggles. Yet even Ellie found herself emotionally conflicted after learning more about Chloe. "She still killed him," one relative whispered afterward. Ellie stared silently at the ground. But later that evening, she watched an old interview clip showing Chloe being escorted into court wearing oversized prison clothing and trembling visibly beneath flashing cameras. For one brief moment, Chloe looked less like a monster and more like someone completely broken. Ellie hated herself for noticing. Inside separate detention facilities, Liam and Chloe were forbidden direct contact while prosecutors prepared for trial. Detectives hoped distance would weaken Liam's influence over his sister permanently. Instead, he found another way. 3 weeks before preliminary hearings began, a corrections officer intercepted a handwritten message hidden inside legal paperwork addressed to Chloe. Detective Collins read the note carefully. The handwriting looked rushed and aggressive. "You know what really happened. Don't let them turn you against me. We survived everything together. Don't betray me in court." Collins immediately recognized the message for what it truly was. Not love. Control. Even from a prison cell, Liam still needed Chloe emotionally trapped beside him. He feared losing her testimony almost as much as losing his freedom itself. When Chloe was later informed about the intercepted letter, her reaction disturbed Collins deeply. The young woman did not appear angry or frightened. She looked guilty, as though she had already betrayed him somehow. That night, alone inside her detention cell, Chloe replayed the murder again in fragmented flashes she still could not fully escape. Daniel begging for mercy. Liam screaming in panic. The knife heavy in her shaking hand. But now another memory surfaced more clearly than before. After the stabbing stopped, Liam looked at her with blood across his face and whispered something quietly into her ear. Something Chloe had not yet told police. Something Chloe had not yet told police. The memory haunted her constantly as the trial of Liam and Chloe Vance began under overwhelming public attention. Reporters crowded outside Birmingham Crown Court before sunrise each morning while television crews debated whether the siblings were cold-blooded killers or victims of lifelong abuse who finally collapsed into violence. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Daniel Mercer's family sat together behind prosecutors, their faces hollow with grief and exhaustion. Ellie Mercer avoided looking toward the defendants entirely as officers escorted Liam and Chloe into the dock separately. For the first time since their arrests, the siblings saw each other again. Liam immediately searched for Chloe's eyes. She looked away. The prosecution wasted no time presenting the murder as deliberate and vicious. Crime scene photographs flashed across courtroom screens while jurors listened to graphic descriptions of Daniel's injuries in horrified silence. 20 stab wounds, Prosecutor Martin Hales stated coldly. This was not panic. This was sustained violence. Photographs of Daniel's blood-covered kitchen forced several jurors to look down. One elderly woman in the public gallery quietly left the courtroom in tears. Hales described Liam as controlling, unstable, and consumed by obsessive jealousy over Daniel Mercer's growing influence on Chloe. He viewed Daniel Mercer as a threat, Hales argued. Not because of money alone, but because Mr. Mercer encouraged Chloe Vance to escape his control. Defense lawyers fought back immediately. Liam's solicitor portrayed him as psychologically damaged by lifelong abuse and severe emotional instability. Chloe's defense took a different approach entirely, emphasizing coercion, dependency, and trauma bonding. She was raised to obey violence, her barrister explained softly to the jury. Fear shaped every relationship in her life. Over several days, witnesses reconstructed the siblings' childhood in painful detail. Former neighbors described hearing beatings through apartment walls. Teachers recalled Chloe arriving terrified and withdrawn while Liam displayed explosive aggression even as a child. Then came Daniel Mercer's hidden audio recording. The courtroom fell completely silent as Liam's voice echoed through the speakers. "If she leaves me, someone bleeds." Chloe visibly flinched hearing it played publicly. Liam stared straight ahead without expression. But the most emotional testimony came from Daniel's closest friend, Marcus Doyle, who revealed Daniel had secretly planned to help Chloe leave Birmingham entirely. He thought she was in danger, Marcus testified. Daniel told me he wanted to get her somewhere safe before Liam dragged her deeper into all that mess. Ellie Mercer began crying quietly beside prosecutors. Across the courtroom, Chloe's face drained of color. For perhaps the first time fully, she realized Daniel had genuinely wanted to protect her without expecting anything in return. The realization shattered something inside her. That afternoon, Liam attempted speaking to Chloe while court recessed briefly. "You don't need to listen to them," he whispered urgently as officers escorted them past one another. Chloe stepped backward immediately. The movement was small, but Liam noticed, and fear entered his expression instantly. Over the following days, Chloe changed visibly inside court. She no longer looked toward Liam for reassurance during testimony. When shown crime scene photographs, she cried openly instead of hiding emotion behind numb silence. Liam grew increasingly agitated watching it happen. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins observed the shift carefully from the gallery. For years, Chloe's identity revolved entirely around her brother's approval. Now, under relentless evidence and emotional pressure, that dependency was beginning to fracture publicly, which made Liam dangerous. On the 7th day of trial, prosecutors introduced final forensic findings from the medical examiner. The courtroom atmosphere changed immediately. Dr. Elaine Porter adjusted her glasses before addressing the jury carefully. 19 wounds occurred while Mr. Mercer remained alive, she explained. However, one injury was inflicted after death had already occurred. A murmur spread across the public gallery. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Can you explain why that matters?" "Yes," Dr. Porter replied calmly. Post-mortem wounds often indicate emotional overkill rather than defensive violence. The final stab entered at a slower angle and with significantly less force than earlier strikes. She paused briefly. It appeared personal. Liam's expression darkened instantly. Meanwhile, Chloe looked physically ill. The prosecutor continued carefully. Based on the angle and positioning, could the final wound have come from someone physically smaller than the primary attacker? Yes. Potentially a female. Yes. Complete silence swallowed the courtroom. Daniel Mercer's family stared toward Chloe in horror while reporters scribbled frantically across notebooks. Even several jurors appeared visibly shaken by the implication. Until that moment, many still viewed Chloe primarily as manipulated and controlled. Now another possibility emerged. That after Daniel Mercer already lay dying on the kitchen floor, Chloe Vance herself delivered the final stab wound. Detective Collins looked toward the defendant slowly. Liam appeared furious. But Chloe looked worse. She looked like someone finally remembering the truth. The courtroom did not recover from the revelation. Even after the break, even after water was offered and jurors were quietly reassured by court officers, the atmosphere remained altered, heavier, charged with something far more unsettling than simple violence. The idea that Daniel Mercer had already been dying when the final wound was delivered changed the moral shape of the entire case. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins sat in the back row, watching as forensic experts returned to the stand with additional clarification. The conclusion was no longer tentative. It was firm. The final post-mortem stab wound most likely came from Chloe Vance. Not Liam. Inside the dock, Liam Vance's expression cracked for the first time since the trial began. His jaw tightened violently, and for a brief second, he turned toward Chloe as if searching for denial, confirmation, anything that would restore the version of reality he had been clinging to. But Chloe did not look at him. That was what disturbed him most. The prosecution did not present the detail as emotion, only fact. The wound angle. The lack of defensive struggle. The timing after cardiac cessation. Yet the impact in the courtroom was immediate and irreversible. Because it destroyed the simple narrative. Chloe was no longer only a victim dragged into violence. She was now something else. Someone who participated in it when escape was already possible. As the court adjourned again, Collins reviewed earlier psychological notes. Chloe's behavior had never been consistent because her memories were not stable. They were layered over trauma, dependency, and suppressed anger that had never been allowed expression. And now those layers were collapsing. The following morning, the court psychologist testified about emotional fragmentation. He described Chloe's mind as compartmentalized survival states, where different versions of herself emerged under stress. But beneath the academic language, the reality was more disturbing. Chloe had carried years of silence. Years of being controlled. Years of being told what to feel. And when Daniel Mercer became the first person outside Liam to show her genuine concern, something inside her destabilized completely. In private review sessions, Chloe's recollections shifted again. Not toward confusion. Toward feeling. She described standing inside the kitchen with noise everywhere. Glass breaking, Liam screaming, Daniel begging for them to stop. But underneath it all, something else surfaced. Anger. Not sudden. Not random. Built slowly over years of being spoken over, pulled away, owned. In one session she whispered, "I just wanted it to stop." When asked what it meant, she hesitated too long to answer cleanly. Her voice broke afterward. "He kept telling me what I was," she said. "What I was allowed to be." The psychologist noted that Chloe's perception of Daniel Mercer shifted during the incident itself. At first, he represented safety. Then interference. Then threat. Her emotional state could no longer separate protection from control. And when violence erupted, something inside her fractured in the only direction it had ever been trained to understand: survival through compliance with aggression. For one brief, horrifying moment inside that kitchen, Chloe Vance felt power. Not peace. Not freedom. Control. And that feeling became indistinguishable from panic. Inside prison, Liam Vance began deteriorating in a different way. He stopped requesting meetings. Stopped shouting at officers. Stopped asking about legal strategy. Instead, he spent long hours sitting motionless, replaying the trial testimony in fragments. Especially Chloe's shifting statements. Especially the way she no longer corrected his version of events. Because Liam's entire identity depended on one belief. That Chloe needed him. That she could not exist without him. But the courtroom had begun stripping that belief away piece by piece. And now, for the first time, he looked uncertain. Dangerously uncertain. During a supervised consultation with his solicitor, Liam suddenly asked quietly, "She said she did it, didn't she?" The solicitor did not answer immediately. That silence was enough. By the final day of sentencing, the courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Public interest had turned the case into something closer to spectacle than trial. Yet inside the dock, both siblings appeared detached from the noise. Chloe stood when instructed, hands trembling slightly. Liam glanced at her once. But she did not return it. For the first time since childhood, she refused to acknowledge him completely. Not anger. Not rebellion. Something quieter. Separation. As the judge began reading the sentence, Chloe kept her gaze fixed forward, toward nothing in particular, while Liam's eyes remained locked on her profile, watching for any sign that she might still belong to him. But she did not look back. And that silence between them said more than any confession ever could. Months after the verdict, Birmingham began to move on in the way cities always do after tragedy. Quietly, awkwardly, as if turning its head away from something too uncomfortable to keep looking at. The headlines faded first. Then the television segments. Then the names. But for those directly involved, nothing truly ended. Daniel Mercer's house remained empty for weeks before his family finally began sorting through it. Ellie Mercer returned reluctantly with relatives, moving through each room like someone walking through a version of her life that no longer belonged to her. The kitchen still carried faint traces of the violence that had happened there, even after cleaning and repainting. Some places, she realized, do not forget what they witnessed. Outside, neighbors resumed their routines. Curtains closed earlier. Conversations shifted away from the subject. The street slowly returned to normal. But normal felt different now. Detective Inspector Rhea Collins found herself unable to detach from the case in the same way others had. Officially, it was closed. Files were archived. Statements finalized. Sentences delivered. Unresolved, however, did not mean finished. She replayed the investigation constantly, The missed signals, the overlooked domestic reports in the Vance household files, the earlier complaints that never escalated far enough to force intervention. Every administrative gap now felt like a door left slightly open. And through it, something terrible had walked in. Inside the prison system, Chloe Vance was placed into mandatory therapy sessions after several psychiatric evaluations confirmed severe trauma-related dissociation. At first, she resisted. She answered questions with short sentences or silence. Her gaze rarely stayed fixed on anything for long. But over time, something shifted. Not healing. Exposure. In structured sessions, Chloe began recounting fragments of her childhood that had never appeared in official statements. Not because they were hidden from investigators, but because she herself had never fully acknowledged them. The shouting behind walls. The nights spent awake listening for footsteps. The way Liam would sometimes sit outside her room without speaking, just to make sure she did not leave. Therapists described it as emotional excavation. Chloe described it as remembering things she had been trained not to feel. And beneath all of it, one truth kept surfacing. She had never existed alone. Meanwhile, Liam Vance deteriorated inside a different kind of isolation. Prison officers reported escalating aggression during confinement checks. He refused medication intermittently, shouted at staff without warning, and on several occasions had to be restrained after violent outbursts in his cell. What unsettled observers most was not only the violence itself, but the shift in its target. Before, everything had been directed outward. Now, it was turning inward. He keeps talking about her like she's still in the room, one officer noted in an internal report. Liam's identity, built entirely around Chloe's dependence, was collapsing without it. Without her reactions, without her fear, without her silence reinforcing his control, he no longer had a stable emotional reference point. And that made him dangerous in a different way. A man who no longer understood what he had lost. Outside prison walls, Ellie Mercer struggled in private silence. Friends expected her to speak about closure, justice, or forgiveness. Instead, she avoided the topic entirely. She changed schools, distanced herself from familiar places, and stopped answering questions about her father unless absolutely necessary. Because closure did not exist for her. Only absence did. One afternoon, while sorting through remaining personal belongings from Daniel's home, she discovered an envelope tucked inside a worn jacket pocket she had almost donated. The paper inside was folded carefully, slightly yellowed at the edges, as if it had been handled repeatedly before being hidden away. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable. The letter was short. Not addressed to anyone specifically, but clearly intended for her. He wrote about exhaustion. About long shifts. About feeling like something was closing in around him, though he never fully named what it was. There was no dramatic confession, no detailed explanation of fear. Only recognition. And one line that stopped Ellie completely. It was not the debt he was afraid of. It was what came with it. Daniel wrote that Liam Vance did not behave like someone demanding money. He behaved like someone protecting ownership. And worse than that, Daniel had realized something days before his death that he never told anyone. Chloe was already being shaped into something she did not recognize. Not through sudden violence, but through years of emotional rewriting. As Ellie finished reading, her hands began to shake. The realization that her father had seen the danger early, but still ended up inside it, hit her with a delayed, crushing weight. He had tried to intervene. He had tried to help. And he had still died. The final pages of the letter ended abruptly, as if Daniel had stopped writing mid-thought. There was no signature, only a faint stain near the bottom corner, possibly from rain or spilled coffee. That night, back inside her prison cell, Chloe Vance received a sealed envelope through official channels labeled as family correspondence. She did not recognize the sender at first. When she opened it, the handwriting inside brought immediate confusion. Then recognition. Then something worse. Daniel Mercer. Her breathing slowed as she read line after line describing fear that was not about money, but about people, about patterns, about control, about what was slowly happening inside her long before she understood it herself. By the time she reached the final sentence, her hands had stopped moving entirely. Because the truth was no longer something she could deny. And for the first time since the night of the killing, Chloe Vance broke completely. Not in anger, not in confusion, but in the unbearable realization that the only person who tried to save her had died believing he failed.